fan base, and right now it's definitely Seattle. But yeah, Pastor Stephen Angliss, welcome to Sovereign Pursuit. I'm Rick,
thanks for having me.
I'm Rick Herron. So, in case
nice to meet you, Rick.
Yeah,
we know each other a little bit.
Yeah. But this is a great topic that we're going to talk about today. It's godliness, and even how eschatology can play into that, into molding us into more like the image of Christ. But the most important question that everybody wants to know is, are you really... No, look at me. Are you really a Washington Redskins / Commanders fan or Seahawks?
Yeah, I got to be really careful because there might be people from our church that are watching this, and I don't want to disqualify myself with this answer and lead to a church split based on what I'm about to say. For those who may not know, Rick and I, we go to church together at Graham Emanuel Baptist Church out here in Western Washington, just south of Tacoma and about an hour away from Seattle. So, fun story, actually. I'm from the East Coast. I grew up about 45 minutes north of Washington, D.C., and when I went to Moody Bible Institute at their campus in Spokane, Washington, many people, as crazy as it sounds, many people, they asked me if I was moving to Washington State because I was a Redskins fan.
Oh, wow.
Which is really saying something, considering we only lived about 45 minutes away from Washington, D.C., where the Washington Redskins play. So all that being said, yes, I am a born and raised Redskins / Commanders fan. That's never going to change. I think you can see maybe some idols, a little bit of a football idolatry on my shelf there.
Yeah.
in the back, that will always be a special part of my life. I always get let down by them, but I always like rooting for them. But even with that being said, I love Seattle. I love Western Washington. I love the Pacific Northwest. And I always like seeing the Seahawks do well, as long as they're not playing the Commanders. And it was cool to see them win the Super Bowl. And I just really like rooting for the sports teams out here as well. But yes, admittedly, it's always second to the Commanders. So what can I say?
Yeah, I'm a Panthers fan because I'm from North Carolina. But I typically just go with whoever has the best fan base, and right now it's definitely Seattle. But yeah, I always brag about the Panthers. They're nearly perfect every season. They are perfect at not winning sometimes.
Yeah, that is true. Yep, that is absolutely true.
Can you tell us about yourself in 60 seconds or 2 minutes?
Sure, 60 seconds. My name is Stephen. I'm a member at Graham Emanuel Baptist Church. I also have the privilege of serving as a senior pastor here at the church. My wife, Kimmy, and I, we have 2 kids, but very soon to be 3. My wife, Kimmy, is expecting our 3rd child, James. He is due next Thursday, so we're very excited for that. And yeah, that's pretty much me. I got my undergrad at Moody Bible Institute. I'm a graduate of the Master's Seminary. I love football, which you already covered. I love reading, love history, love hiking. This is a great place to live for all of those things. Football, history, nature. There's a lot of that out here. So yeah, that's me. And I don't even think that took 60 seconds.
Well, okay, you mentioned Kimmy and your children, so I want to lead right into this. Why is personal godliness, because we don't want to be presumptuous here, why is it essential for a pastor these days, even before he steps into the pulpit? Because a lot of people go into the pulpit very relaxed, and I get nervous for them. I remember, I don't remember, but I heard of Charles Spurgeon. As he walked the steps to his pulpit, he would say, I believe in the Holy Spirit. I believe in the Holy Spirit. We need that fear of God. So can you tell us why it is so essential?
Yeah, good question, Rick. And I just want to commend you. I don't think I've ever seen someone pair the topics of personal godliness and pastoral ministry with eschatology. So credit to you. I know we're going to talk a little bit about eschatology later this morning as well. And I do think that those two are actually connected. I think there's a bridge that we see between those two. But just to start out, as a pastor of a church, I've been a pastor since I was 24 years old. God has blessed me in that way. I've been pastoring for about 8 years now in the senior pastoral role at 2 different churches. I think the first thing that I would say, Rick, is I hope that anybody watching would not look to me as like this finished product of godliness, or as some kind of sage who has figured out holiness and that I'm just a finished product. I am a brother in Christ who, I think of Paul, I mean, chief among sinners. I think those who really tremble in ministry, and like what you said of Spurgeon, who have just that real fear. I think what that really comes from is a true recognition of one's own sin.
Right.
So I think there's something to be said about that as well. I would hate to talk about personal holiness, portraying myself as just this perfect, squeaky clean person who doesn't have to daily fight the battle of sin, or has not looked back on his life, with regrets and areas where I've needed much forgiveness.
Right.
But the one thing that I would say for anybody watching, especially for maybe men who are in pastoral ministry, or men who are thinking about entering pastoral ministry, I would strongly encourage men to make 1 Timothy chapter 4 a very precious chapter in the recesses of their heart. And you and I have actually looked at this chapter together in some of our studies together, because Paul's writing to a young man, Timothy, who's about to do some pastoral ministry in Asia Minor, particularly in Ephesus. And one of the things I'm looking at it right now that Paul says in 1 Timothy 4, verse 7, is he tells Timothy to train himself for the purpose of godliness, which is just really powerful. It's really telling. As men, we often think about how we can physically train ourselves, and the reps and the protein and the macros and all the discipline that we need to physically build ourselves. But Paul tells Timothy that in ministry, he needs to have that same kind of intensity and focus and discipline to look over his spiritual life and his behavior. Because as Paul says in verse 8, this holds promise not only in the present life, but also for the life to come.
Yes.
That bodily training is of some value, but what is of eternal value, especially for a pastor, is one who he takes seriously his need to spiritually train himself to renounce sin, to put sin to death, and to live new life unto God. Often young men, especially those who are interested in ministry, they are all about training themselves in Greek and training themselves in preaching and reading as many books as they can, which are all good pursuits. But the Bible tells us that pursuing godliness should be the utmost pursuit. That as much as you're pursuing these other things, to really see godliness as something that must be sought after by God's grace, and walked in by God's Spirit. So I know there's a lot of other things to be said, but does that answer your question? Or
yes, yeah, because I really like my friend in the UK, David Knight. He's been on this. I feel like we're just definitely brothers, kindred spirits, because he has really been emphasizing authentic Christianity. Are you really a Christian? And I think the difference that I see personally in a real believer and someone who just wants to feel good about themselves is godliness. Yeah, a real believer has a desire to pursue godliness. And yes, that was well said. And with that being said, we talked about how sometimes young seminary students can be distracted by studying the Greek and church history. But what are some common pitfalls other than that you've seen that would disrupt godliness in even the marriage?
Yeah, especially in the marriage. I think in some ways when you use the word pitfall, what are some common pitfalls for a young pastor or an aspiring pastor or for any young man? The pitfall could be anything. And I think particularly we should recognize that the pitfall could be anything, especially those that we would least expect. Peter tells us that Satan prowls like a lion looking for someone to devour. Usually it is the areas of our life that we think are okay, that we think are not an issue, that are the most susceptible to attack. I want to back up real quick though and just say that I by no means ever want to give the impression, and I don't think that you were taking it this way, but I never want to give the impression that the pursuing of intellect and Greek and study, I never want to suggest that those are bad things. It's just that so often I think we tend to evaluate ourselves as ministers and men only according to those barometers, and godliness is something that we just assume or take for granted. And that in itself is a pitfall. I think probably the most obvious one would be the pitfall of sexual sin. We've seen that in some very difficult cases. Even recently, there's been men especially of high repute, who they have been brought down by sexual sin. That is something that always needs to be guarded against in very serious ways. But I think for me, one of the things that I learned about sexual sin, and I think Heath Lambert in some of his writings has really helped me in this way, is how sexual sin is so closely tied to pride that many men think that they just have an issue with sexual sin, but really it's an issue with self-centeredness, and their desire for self-gratification. And that same pride that fuels self-gratification is also going to be a sin that appears in so many other ways. And so I think the interesting thing about pitfalls is I think it's hard to pinpoint just one, because I think in any man's life, the pitfalls that Satan is going to attack and he's going to use are going to be the areas of which a man is probably not paying too close attention. Which leads us back to 1 Timothy 4, which is why Paul says you should pay attention to your life, and you should really closely examine your heart and your thoughts to see whether or not they do align with godliness, because if they don't, they will be exposed in very troubling ways in ministry. I think the last thing I'll say to this question is, you mentioned marriage. What's amazing about marriage, and what's also terrible about marriage, or painful about marriage, is that marriage has a way of bringing to light one's spiritual weaknesses. Yeah. That you can think that you're a pretty okay guy, but just wait until you get married. You will recognize, or you will be confronted with weakness and sin in your life, and your wife will be one who is used by God to bring that up to you. Yes. Men will be confronted with their sin through their marriage, and ministry is very much in the same way. That ministry, as Paul David Tripp called it, is a dangerous calling. Because if there is pride, if there is self-centeredness, if there is apathy, if there is sexual sin, I mean, the list goes on. Ministering and shepherding to a group of people, those things will bubble up. Those patterns of behavior will display themselves and be seen and hopefully dealt with. And so that's why, godliness is important. Because I have noticed that Satan, when he seeks to tear down pastors in ministry, he rarely does it by tearing down a pastor's ability to preach, or his ability to exegete the Greek. It's usually through behavior and attitude and godliness. And these are the same things that can tear down a marriage. Very important stuff, Rick.
Yeah, I like that you say that, because I've been growing so much, and I would never say that I've arrived either. But what stuck out in my mind when you were talking about that is we were driving and we were upset because no one was moving in front of us. And Titus, the 5-year-old, he says, "Hey, can you think about how patient Jesus was?" And I was like, wow, that's the end goal, right? And if I'm doing it for anyone other than him and to be made into his image, then I'm off base. I need to re-examine it. And when you were talking about marriage just then, and so how does Kimmy come alongside you biblically? How does that look for someone's wife to come alongside them when they're entering into the ministry? Because you don't want to sweep them under the rug and say, "Hey, I'm doing God's work. You go back here in the kitchen," you know?
Yeah. Oh, you don't? Whoops.
Oh, whoa.
I got to make a call. Whoa. No, just kidding. Yeah. The role of the wife. I'll speak for myself, and I've heard other pastors and pastors' wives share similar things, which is, I think in ministry, what can often happen is a pastor can get very beat down in ministry, and pastoral ministry can bring a lot of hardship and a lot of perhaps unfairness or just unkindness that a pastor has to deal with. And sometimes as a result of that, a wife will see that hurt and see that pain and that suffering that her husband is going through. And as a wife, most wives, I think, would feel this way, to become very defensive and very supportive. And I think, as much as I appreciate that, I know Kimmy absolutely is that way. She is a total support and a friend and a cheerleader in my life. But I think where a line can be crossed in that is that a wife being well intended in her desire to support her husband, there can be almost a vacuum or a closed feedback loop where a husband is perhaps confronted with sin or dealing with hard things at church, some of which he may be responsible for. There may be legitimate attitudes or microaggressions or subtle areas of sin that may be contributing to these issues. And a wife will well intentionally want to be supportive, but it will turn to such an extent that it becomes hatred and bitterness towards the congregation. And it becomes almost a blind acceptance and a blind love for her husband without recognizing that he is also someone being sanctified and maybe someone that needs to recognize how he's contributing to an issue. And so that's not really the answer that I think most husbands in ministry and their wives are used to hearing or wanting to hear. But I think one role that I think Kimmy does very well, and I'm very thankful for this, and I think is wise for all wives in ministry, is when they support their husbands who are struggling or maybe going through hard things, to balance that love and sympathy with honesty and admonition and a spurring on to good deeds, which is a very hard thing to balance. And I think husbands, what we need to do better of is we need to give our wives permission to edify us and bless us in that way, not blowing up at them or saying, well, whose side are you on? Or, those kind of things. But to allow our wife to be a confidant that we share our hurts with, but also trusting her and giving her license to hear our hurt, but also speak into our lives and ask pointed questions about words or actions or behaviors that perhaps we could have done differently. I would say that is one of the most beneficial things that a wife could do to support a husband in ministry, or a husband just in life. All husbands are in ministry to some extent. And so what that takes is, I think, courage and pointedness and wisdom from the wife. That also takes a strong heart of the wife to not fall into gossip and slander and bitterness and anger towards those that she perceives are against her husband. But it also takes a lot of humility from the husband to allow his wife to not just be a yes woman and just side with him and all of his complaints that he brings home every day, but allow her and trust her to speak wisely into the situations that he's going through.
That is awesome. Yeah, I really like how you put that, because those are ways to protect against it, and even for those who aren't married and they're going into the ministry, it's always good to have someone to keep you accountable, a brother in the Lord, because that's how we grow. And then the next question is, now, knowing that this is not our home, all right, and our citizenship is in heaven, as Philippians 3:20 tells us, how are we to use the end times? Because they're very scary to some people, but to me, it's kind of a great thing. I look forward to studying the end times. How do we use this to get our focus, even on the children, to get our focus on Christ in eternity?
Yeah. Again, I love this connection between personal holiness and ministry with eschatology, because I'm convinced that eschatology has a trickle down effect in the way that you think about church, in the way that you think about ministry, and as a result, as in the way that you think about your life. Because if you believe certain things about what will happen in the future, that should, and I think inevitably will, shape your heart in how you choose to conduct life with your family, and how you choose to look over your personal life. So your question was specifically, how do we share this with children?
Well, how do we, hey, this is not the end goal here. We need to be preparing for eternity.
Yeah. Hopefully I'm answering your question correctly. If I'm not, yeah, just continue to steer me where I need to go.
Sure.
Because I don't know if I'm completely understanding the question, but I want to make sure I get this right for you.
Because, like when we lose a pet, we have to tell them, hey, this happens. Death happens, and we are to, like, that's what we teach our kids here about heaven and hell. And how would you do that? Not just to your children, but how would you, hey, this is what we need to focus on, eternity. Not necessarily eschatology, but just let's focus on eternity. And then I would like you to give us a quick overview of eschatology at the end of this question. So.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, just thinking about eternity, one of the things that I remember reading from, I think it was Michael Reeves. He wrote a great book on just the Puritans, giving an overview of their life and their conduct. He said one thing specifically that has still stuck with me. And I even had a tweet about it actually about a month ago, where he said that one of the things that made the Puritans unique is that they lived almost every day thinking about heaven. Meaning that they always had eternity on the forefront of their minds. And it was never as a negative thing. It was never as a kind of doom and gloom or like this coming judgment or this guillotine leaning over the head. They always lived their life every day with the recognition that everything in this world is temporary, that Jesus is coming back, that there will be an eternal future heaven and earth that God is going to create and bring and replace with our current reality. And that produced a lot of joyfulness in their life that allowed them to lead their families and conduct themselves in church and in their community with a lot of joy and a lot of hopefulness. Because like through Pilgrim's Progress, they were always looking to the celestial city. And I have young children right now. We're just starting to introduce those concepts of life and death and heaven and hell. But it's extremely important to make sure that kids know that heaven is real and heaven is where God is. What makes heaven heaven is the presence of God. And that there's also a place where God is not present, and that is hell. But that there is a reality after death, that there is a place after death where everyone goes. And I don't believe that this needs to be a scary thing necessarily. There should be a fear of the Lord, and there should be a recognition of the reality of hell. But there is a great opportunity to encourage children of the hope that someday Jesus is coming back, and someday those who have put their faith in Jesus Christ will be with Jesus, that Jesus has gone to prepare a place for us, and that he is coming back to receive us unto himself. And so, yeah, all those things I think very positively can be shared, because I think one who has a positive view of heaven and the future and of eternity is going to live very positively here on earth. I think that's going to produce a lot of joyfulness and a very, I guess, jolly, for lack of a better term, a very jolly life. And I think of Spurgeon as a great example of that. C.S. Lewis, John Piper, the Puritans, John MacArthur. These were men who very much enjoyed life. They were joyful people, and their family and their children were very joyful too. And I believe it's because they had that very instilled recognition of the hope of heaven.
Yeah, to me, when I look at eschatology and the end times, because I was encouraged by Revelations 3:17, where it says, I have given you hidden manna, and I've given you a name that no one knows but you. And it was just like, it's so hopeful and encouraging. So how would you go through, let's just say, explaining a quick overview to people who don't even know what eschatology is?
Gotcha. Well, eschatology is a long word that just describes a field of study of theology. Theology is broken up into different categories. If you were opened up a theology book, you would see different chapters of that theology book covering different topics and different sections of biblical truth. And eschatology just happens to be that section or that chapter of theology that focuses on the last things. That's what the word eschatology means. Eschatos from Greek meaning last, and logos meaning the word or the study or the matter of something. And so eschatology is the study of the last things. What will happen at the end? And we could spend all day breaking down the different subcategories of eschatology, all the different beliefs and theories of eschatology. You had mentioned children and leading one's family. So I'm just going to read from John chapter 14. This is probably my favorite eschatological verse from the New Testament, at least. It's one of my favorites, and it's one that I would highly recommend as a starting verse for children. And it's actually one that I just quoted a few minutes ago. It's from the words of Jesus, John chapter 14, where he says, "In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. And," verse 3, "if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also."
Amen.
I find this just beautiful. We so often hear it at funerals, but it's really a verse for the living, because Jesus is telling his disciples, hey, I'm getting ready to be crucified and to be resurrected and to ascend to the Father. I'm going to be gone, but I'm going to come back. And where I'm at right now in heaven with my heavenly Father, this is not the new creation yet. This is not the new Jerusalem. This is simply Jesus in the presence of the Father in heaven as we know it right now. Jesus says that he is preparing for us a dwelling place in that heaven.
Wow.
Not a future kingdom, but right now in the presence of God, that there is an opportunity to dwell with him. And Jesus says, hey, guess what? I'm going to come back, and I'm going to receive all of my disciples, and we are going to go back to this dwelling place with the Father.
Wow.
That is one of, I think, the most convicting and beautiful and underutilized verses on the rapture, ironically. That this is a clear evidence that even before God brings about his final judgment, and even before he brings about a new creation and a new heaven and a new earth, Jesus makes it very clear that it is possible to dwell with the Father in heaven, that those who die will dwell with the Father in heaven, and that Jesus will even come back to bring his disciples to dwell with the Father in heaven, which is exactly what we see described in Revelation. So,
That's so good.
so this might be where people log off, Rick.
No.
This might people say like, hey, I like this Stephen guy.
No.
I didn't know that he was a conehead, tinfoil wearing, dispensationalist.
Well, like we're about out of time. Can you tell us way to get in touch with you real quick?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So the best way to get in touch with me is by coming to church on Sunday. I'm an attender and a member here at Graham Emmanuel Baptist Church. We'd love to have you visit and join us.
And you're on X.
I am on X, but I see that as very secondary. I don't really see that as a platform or like this thing where people can come to know me. I definitely post thoughts and I have interactions. But yeah, certainly, X. Feel free to follow me on X, Stephen_Angliss. And yeah, after that, there not much. I have a Facebook, I have an Instagram. You can see a lot of baby pictures and what's going on in my family's life. But yeah, here at church, Graham Emmanuel Baptist Church, or Twitter, X as it's called.
Well, thank you, brother. It was an honor to meet with you today. And do follow Stephen Angliss on X for great wisdom nuggets. And and God bless you. Thank you for joining us today, Pastor.
Rick, this was a blast. Have a good one.
You stepped into my darkness, and I'll never be the same.